about the attempted assassination in the CNN film Navalny.
It's kind of stupid, the whole idea of poisoning with a chemical weapon. What the f***? This is why this is so smart. Because even reasonable people, they refuse to believe, like, what? Come on, poisoned? Seriously?
The Kremlin and Russia's security services deny they played any role in Navalny's poisoning. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. AC360 starts now.
Good evening. A week ago today, a gunman took 21 lives at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas. He murdered 21 people. Starting today and for the next 2 weeks, people in Uvalde will be attending funerals for the 19 children and the 2 teachers that he murdered. 2 weeks of mourning, followed by a lifetime of absence. Tonight, for the first time, we have a phone message sent to parents by the school district while the shooter was still in the school. We've also just learned that this man, Pedro Pete Arredondo, chief of police for Uvalde School District, who was the incident commander that day, meaning the person authorities have said made the decision not to have his officers immediately go into that classroom and stop the shooter, even though he knew it was an active shooter situation. He, according to reports, has not responded to state investigators for 2 days. So keep that in mind as you listen to this recording obtained by affiliate KSAT. It went out at 12:20 local time. In other words, as the shooting was happening and as police were standing by, waiting in a small Texas town for a tactical team to arrive and then assemble, gear up, and then go in. No one was confronting the shooter during that time. Police were standing outside the adjoining classrooms where some kids were wounded, some possibly dying still, and others were hiding, smearing themselves with blood in order to appear dead, as one girl did, or calling 911 for help. And those police officers were not going in.
This is Anne Marie Espinoza with Uvalde CISD. Uvalde CISD parents, there is an active shooter at Robb Elementary. Law enforcement is on site. Your cooperation is needed at this time by not visiting the campus. As soon as more information is gathered, it will be shared. The rest of the school district is under a secure status of a precautionary measure to keep our students and staff safe. We appreciate your cooperation and understanding at this time, and we will share more information as it becomes available. Thank you.
So that call goes at 12:20 local time, school district telling parents there's an active shooter situation at the school, yet the 19 officers on the scene were treating it as something other than that, mistakenly so, because when it comes to dealing with active shooters, the guidelines are clear.
First of all, when it comes to an active shooter, you don't have to wait on tactical gear. Plain and simple, you've got an obligation.
He's saying you don't have to wait on tactical gear. In fact, I want to read you a couple of items from the active shooting training manual for the state of Texas. Item 1 is the prime directive. It reads, "Stop the killing. Officers' first priority is to move in and confront the attacker. This may include bypassing the injured and not responding to cries for help from children. The key, they're saying, is to stop the shooter in any way necessary." Item 2 is this blunt advice. A first responder unwilling to place the lives of the innocent above their own safety should consider another career field. So that's what the police on scene should have done, but did not do for 1 hour. Yet listening to that same official, Stephen McGraw, at a briefing just the day after the shooting, before the reality of what police didn't do was clear to everybody. Police knew, people who had been on the scene knew, but the rest of the world did not know. If you'd listened to Mr. McGraw, Steve McGraw, at that point, the day after the shooting, you might have been led to believe that a delay never happened and that everyone on the scene acted just as quickly as they should have.
When the shooting began, we had Uvalde police officers arrive on scene, and along with the Consolidated Independent School District officers, immediately breached, because as we know in officers, every second's a life. They breached it, engaged the active shooter, and continued to keep him pinned down in that location, afterwards, until after a tactical team could be put together, comprised of Border Patrol agents on the front end, some members of their BORTAC unit, which is a SWAT team for Border Patrol.
So he's saying they breached it, they engaged with the shooter and then they waited for a tactical team. He mentioned nothing about when the children were killed. There were children still alive, calling 911. When he said that the day after the shootings, there were already questions because the training on active shooters is clear. You do not wait for a tactical team. You don't wait for backup. You just don't wait. Statistics gathered by the FBI in the wake of Sandy Hook in a 2013 report where they looked at all active shooters situations going back to Columbine note that the average active shooter situation lasts 12 minutes and 30% are over in less than 5 minutes, 37 minutes. That means, sorry, 37%. That means that that in less than 5 minutes, most of the people are killed 30% of the time, 37% of the time. At Robb Elementary, according to a regional director for the Texas Public Safety Department, the majority of the gunfire was at the beginning of the attack, which is what we just said. Many times, most of the people are killed right away. But crucially, the shooting did not end. We now know that at 12:21, after police had been outside the classroom for a half hour already, a minute after that phone call from the school went out to parents saying there was an active shooter situation going on, 3 more shots are fired, and a third student inside the classroom calls 911. The third 911 call, meaning a child was still alive in there and calling for help. And yet, still no police went in. And on Friday, that Texas public safety official you heard a moment ago gave the reason.
The on-scene commander considered it a barricaded subject and that there was time and there were no more children at risk. Obviously, based upon the information we have, there were children in that classroom that were at risk, and it was, in fact, still an active shooter situation and not a barricaded subject.
The thing is, he's saying based on the information we have, implying that the information, one that we now know that wasn't the case. But the thing is, somebody in the police department certainly knew. I mean, they'd heard more shots. They knew the shooter was shooting at somebody or something. And police had received 911 calls from the third one at 12:21. They knew there were still kids in the classroom with the shooter. They knew that then. It's not just we now have that information, as he was implying. Their 911 dispatchers certainly knew some of those kids were alive and still in danger. Does that information get sent down to the police who were standing in the hallway? Contrast that to the response when a gunman opened fire at the Washington, D.C. Navy Yard in 2013. You can see all the different agencies, military and civilian, responding. The after-action report details all the confusion and mixed signals authorities in Uvalde might have experienced. It also praises the cooperation of many agencies, 117 responders in all. And yeah, they went in. The first officers who went in, if you look at the surveillance footage, it's a member of the Navy. It's a bicycle police officer. They went in and they killed the gunman. Certainly a different place with different resources, yet it's hard to say that the team that went into Robb Elementary was undermanned. There were 19 armed officers there and more nearby, in a far more confined location than many, with a clearly urgent need to act, which they didn't do. And the question is why, and perhaps also why Chief Arredondo, the incident commander, no longer seems to be cooperating with the investigation. We'll be joined in a moment by 2 law enforcement professionals, one of who trains first responders on what to do in active shooter situations. But first, let's get the latest details from CNN's Ed Lavendera.
A chilling new account from inside Robb Elementary during the mass shooting.
Are you injured?
Oh my God!
Where?
A kid got shot.
They shot a kid?
That audio was taken by a man who spoke to CNN but didn't want to be publicly identified. A Facebook Live video includes what he says is audio from the radio in a Customs and Border Protection vehicle outside the school. It is not clear at what point during the shooting this video was taken. We're also hearing from a Customs and Border Protection officer whose wife is a teacher at the school, where his daughter is also a second grader. He was off duty at a barber shop when he got this text message from his wife.
There's an active shooter. Help. I love you, for my wife.
That's when he raced over to what he describes as a chaotic scene at the school.
Everyone was trying to get to the school. People were trying to get everything situated. I was just trying to get towards my wife's room and my daughter's room. As I was going in, I could just see kids coming out of the windows and kids coming my way, so I was just helping all the kids out.
Both his wife and daughter got out safely. One teacher describes the tense moments in her schoolroom after spotting the gunman outside her class window.
I just kept hearing shots fired, and I just kept praying
God, please don't let him come in my room. Please don't let him come in this room. And for some reason, he didn't.
ABC News obtained a portion of video that appears to be audio from a 911 operator relaying information from a child inside the classroom.
We have a child online. Child is advising he is in the room full of victims.
Questions remain focused tonight on the police response. The Texas Department of Public Safety director says it was the school district police chief, Pete Arredondo, who made the decision not to breach the classrooms earlier. Arredondo, who hasn't been seen publicly since the shooting, is facing harsh criticism and a Department of Justice review for what officers didn't do, as kids inside the school repeatedly called 911, pleading for help.
And you cry and you mourn harder here because they didn't have a chance.
The first funerals for the victims in the mass school shooting in Uvalde were held today.
When that casket closes and that they lower it down, for me, it's the realization that you won't be able to touch them again. One more hug, one more kiss, one more goodbye.
The funeral expenses for every family are being covered at no cost thanks to an anonymous donor, according to Texas Governor Greg Abbott.
Off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you how many, but I think one every day.
Father Eduardo Morales says he will preside at 12 funeral services for victims over the next 2 weeks. Today, visitations or funerals were held for at least 4 students and 1 teacher.
Nobody should ever have to go through this hardship, you know, and something that could have very well been avoided.
Ed Lavadera joins us now. Authorities gave an update on the back door that the shooter apparently used to get into the school. There had been reports that it had been left open, maybe a rock was in place to leave it open. What did they say?
Well, Anderson, you're right. If you remember last week, Texas Department of Public Safety investigators were saying that an unidentified teacher had left that back door propped open, and that's how the gunman was able to get inside the school. Well, now that story has changed. Texas Department of Public Safety officials are now saying that that teacher, once she realized that there was a gunman on the campus, went back to the door and closed it, but it did not lock. Anderson?
Ed Lavadera, appreciate it. Thank you. More now on Chief Arredondo and why he hasn't responded to Texas Rangers for 2 days who are investigating what went on. CNN's Shimon Prokupecz joins us with that. So, Shimon, do authorities know why the Uvalde School District Police Chief is not responding?
Well, I think part of it is now that he knows there's this scrutiny on him, he perhaps is has concern for his, legally for himself, and so that's why he's not responding to their questions. But for all intents and purposes, he's not cooperating at this point with the Texas Rangers. They've asked him for information, for follow-up interviews, and so far that has not happened. We have been making every effort to try and get in touch with him. We've been to his home. We've been trying other ways to reach him, and Anderson, we've just not been able to get to him. He was not at that Friday press conference. The DPS head there said that they don't know why he wasn't there, but he just wasn't there. So obviously a lot of questions that he needs to answer, but no one really knows where he is right now.
Shimon, I want to play a question that you asked to police. I think this was last week, and it was Thursday, and I just think it's really important because, you know, there were a lot of questions from the moment. And you and I spoke on the phone the day after this when I was going down there, and you'd been on the scene and know this better than anyone what was going on. And I asked you about the statement that the police had made, and it was clearly written the way the statement the police was made. It was strange the way it was worded. It clearly was avoiding some very glaring topics, like why were they waiting for a tactical team. You finally confronted one of the police officials about it, and I think it was an important moment, and I just want to play that.
You guys have said that he was barricaded. Can you explain to us how he was barricaded and why you guys cannot breach that door?
So I am taking all your questions into consideration. We will be doing updates. We will be doing updates to answer those questions.
You should be able to answer that question now, sir.
Seems like it was after that press conference, and I might have the timing wrong, but that they realized people were aware that, I mean, reporters were asking questions. You were asking really important questions that they, frankly, had been dancing around for days and avoiding talking about.
Right, and Anderson, in the beginning, there was information that, well, maybe he was inside that classroom for 30 minutes. Then we started getting indications that, well, no, it may have been up to an hour. And that's when you started seeing that there were holes in this story. Having covered other active shooters, sadly, I was just in Buffalo 2 weeks ago, in terms of when you cover these stories, you always hear from the police that they move in quickly, that they neutralize the gunman. We did not hear that in this case. The timeline kept changing and it kept moving further and further away, which showed that perhaps the police didn't do exactly everything they were supposed to do. And you sort of just got the sense that the public here, the families, the parents of these kids were not getting the full story, because it's almost as if the police officers were trying to protect themselves. Right. And sure enough, after days and days of asking Anderson, we get the truth and we see that these officers were simply standing in the hallway protecting themselves while the gunman was inside with kids, children, as you said, who were still alive.
And it's also clearly other officers knew that this was a problem, because what in their public statements early on, what they kept pointing out was all the, the officers who went and broke windows to help other kids get out in other parts of the school, which is very important and a great thing and obviously important. But the number one priority, if you have a gunman cornered in a room and there are children in that room, and even if you think that all the children have been killed, you don't know. And even then you're getting 911 calls from a child in the room, and there are 3 911 calls. It just was interesting to me how that's the story they were selling in the first couple of days about getting the broken windows and getting all the kids out of the school and avoiding the most important question. And it took days and a press conference like the one where you asked questions. Was there anything new we learned about the investigation today?
Well, other than the fact that we have this new information about Arredondo Knott, the chief of the school, that the school police, that he's not cooperating. Obviously, they've changed the story now on the door, initially saying that this teacher left the door open. And really, Anderson, even that piece of information only started trickling out because her lawyer came forward to the local newspaper and revealed that information. So the police are not even being proactive with discrepancies in their own story and putting them out there. It takes other people to come forward, and then they finally come out with the new information. Look, the bottom line, Anderson, is that now more than ever, we need to see those surveillance videotapes that are from the hallways of that school, and we need to listen to the radio transmissions that the police were having between each other on that day. Who was giving the orders not to go in, not to storm the door? Yes, they're blaming the chief of the school police. However, you talk to officials here and law enforcement from all across the country, they'll tell you there were many other senior level people there, like the chief of the local police, the sheriff was on scene. Why weren't those people standing up and saying, wait, we may be making a bad decision here, we need to storm into that classroom? So there are still a lot of questions that the police need to answer. The local state senator, Anderson, here for the district here, says that he expects to get a report from the Texas officials that are conducting this investigation on Friday. So maybe then, Anderson, we'll learn more.
Yeah, Shimon Prokopez, appreciate it. Thank you. Joining us now, 17-year New York Police Emergency Service Unit veteran Andy Burchard. Also CNN senior law enforcement analyst Charles Ramsey, former top cop in Philadelphia and Washington, D.C. Andy, appreciate you joining us, Chief Ramsey as well. You're an active shooter training instructor. The decision that, well, all the people in the room are probably dead and therefore we don't need to go in until a tactical unit arrives, if that was their thinking, does that make any sense to you?
Thank you for having me, Anderson. No, of course not. From the reports that we're getting, the broken pieces of reports, you had communication with the 911 operators that there were children or seriously injured victims inside, and there needed to be a clear decision, whatever you want to term it, as an active shooter, as a barricade, there's potential loss of life, whether it be a child, an adult, there's human life at risk, and a decision needs to be made to aggressively approach the suspect.
Chief Ramsey, we also learned that officers on the scene received a dispatch call informing them that a child called 911 from inside the school, letting them know what was happening. How does something like that come through? Would that go to the officers who are on the scene?
Well, I mean, it should. Someone should be receiving that kind of information. But that's why the DOJ investigation is going to be so critically important. Until we have that independent investigation where we get actual timelines, verified facts, and hopefully they've already notified all agencies to save all audio tapes, videotapes, written reports, everything that has to do with this investigation or this case, so that they can investigate it thoroughly. Because right now you're getting bits and pieces and they're putting information out without even verifying it. And that's why it keeps changing all the time. So we really do need this independent investigation.
Andy, for a 60 Minutes report, I was able to take a couple of training exercises with the New York Police Department in their active shooter training. They have every officer go through active shooter training because any officer could be a first responder, depending where they are when a shooting like this happens. And one of the things that surprised me was that instructors were saying, even if there are injured people, you know, in the hallway as you approach a room where there's a shooter, you don't stop for the injured people. The priority number one is stop the shooter. Can you just explain why that is so important?
Certainly. Although bleeding control is an absolute aspect of survival of the situation, so is neutralizing the threat, whether it be taking them into custody, whether to neutralizing them using deadly force. The more the active shooter has to continue, more deaths or serious injury can be accumulated. So we train them to bypass it. You have previous situations, I don't want to name specifically, where children were reaching out, you know, grabbing responders as they were advancing through. And we drill that into our officers and students that you need to go by and locate, isolate, and neutralize the threat and whatever needs necessary.
I mean, that has got to be the toughest job for a police officer, you know, to do that, knowing that it's going to potentially save more lives. Chief Ramsey, what happens here next? I mean, you have this police officer who's not responding to authorities who are investigating that. Does that hamper the investigation? Police chief.
Well, it slows it down, but I would not be surprised if he has an attorney by now who's telling him not to make any public statements. Obviously, he's exposed, perhaps criminally, but certainly civilly. And I think both the school district and the chief have a lot to face on the civil side of things. So he may be told not to cooperate. In the meantime, they're going to continue the investigation the best they can. But once DOJ gets involved, maybe that'll change in terms of him actually cooperating. You don't want to see this thing get to a grand jury or anything like that. You want to be able to do the investigation, do a thorough investigation. You can't really do that without him. He was the incident commander at the time. So it's going to be important that they be able to speak with him as well as others. And you raised something very important, Anderson, that I don't want to overlook. There were other top officials there on the scene. Now, I've handled a lot of these things, and Andy probably has too. And you got something as significant as a school shooting, guess what? You're on the phone notifying a whole bunch of folks, your elected officials and everyone else, to give them a heads up and let them know what's going on. And so this thing could go a lot higher than the chief once the investigation of this really gets going.
And Andy, just briefly, I mean, you agree time is the critical factor here. That's why everything has to be done so quickly. That's why, I mean, a tactical team in most, you know, not in New York, but in a lot of cities or small towns, it would take a long time for a tactical team to gather, right?
No, absolutely. I mean, I'm blessed with being in the city of New York. We have a tactical team that I was involved with for 20 years at hand. We train even our officers, even in Manhattan, as condensed as it is. It might be the boots on the ground patrol guys going in, but we find statistically that the perpetrator of the active shooters tend to be cowards. And by pressing them, cornering them, isolating them, it can make a tremendous difference. Time is absolutely a factor that needs to be pressed, which is why we instruct and show, lock those doors, slow them down. They know they have a limited time of carnage to create before they're pressed to face law enforcement.
Andy Burchett, I appreciate what you do. Chief Ramsey as well. Thank you so much. Coming up next, the father of one young girl who lost her life at Robb Elementary. We'll talk to him. And later, key developments in the fight for eastern Ukraine on and off the battlefield, including today's presidential announcement that the U.S. is now sending advanced battlefield rocket systems to Ukraine. Talk with former NATO Supreme Allied Commander Wesley Clark ahead.
this place we all belong.
Free the Girls is an anti-trafficking organization that was started to help survivors re-enter the workplace through the sale of secondhand bras in used clothing markets around the world. My name is Dave Terpstra, and I'm co-founder of Free the Girls. One of the things that we discovered that survivors struggle with is getting back into society after they've been rescued, after they've been rehabilitated. How do they re-engage real life? And so we created a program that's designed to help them start their own micro-enterprise and grow their own business for themselves. We have women donate bras, and as we say, bras are something women wear close to their hearts. And this is an issue that touches the hearts of many women, and they want to play a part. They hear about these women who are traumatized, who have been trafficked around the world in terrible situations, and this is such a tangible way for them to reach out. When CNN first came 10 years ago to tell our story, we hadn't yet shipped our first container of bras. And CNN was there to record the entire process when that container arrived. That first container had 30,000 bras. We've since shipped 9 40-foot containers. Over 1 million bras have come here to Mozambique for our women to sell. That has transformed some lives.
Our mission here at CNN and journalists, the news comes first. That's when your heart beats a little bit faster.
More breaking news that we are following right now.
You really work as hard as you can, getting the facts.
We're learning more about our lead clots.
It is critically important.
To our viewers in the United States and around the world, welcome to the Situation Room. We have breaking
Each night here on the broadcast, we've been trying to bring you a little bit of information about the children, the teachers whose lives were stolen from them, Robb Elementary. Tonight, we want to tell you more about Alithia Ramirez. She was 10 years old. Her father, Ryan, says Alithia loved to draw. She wanted to be an artist, and she already was. I want to show you some of her artwork. This is her father's Facebook page. It's the winning poster that Alithia designed for her age group to help promote bullying prevention. The title, Kindness Takes Courage. And it certainly does. Her father, Ryan Ramirez, joins us now. Ryan, thank you so much for being with us. I am so sorry for your loss. Can you tell us a little bit about Alithia? It's so lovely to see her art.
Well, Alithia, she was very lovable and kind. She was just reliable. She was just there for anybody that needed anything. And that was one thing that we all loved about her. And just with the drawing, she just loved drawing. loved drawing so much. Every day she always had a crayon in her hand and just going to town, just going.
I understand that President Biden, you met with him, and he said that he wanted to have some of Olivia's work in the White House. Olivia's work in the White House.
Yes, he had told me that just to pick one of the whatever drawings that she had did that he wants at the White House.
There was a little girl named Grace McDonald who was killed at Sandy Hook, and she was also an artist. And I remember President Obama, Grace's family, Lynn, her mom gave President Obama a drawing of an owl that she had done, and he actually had that at the White House. So there's a history for that. Can you tell us about last Tuesday? I mean, not only did you go through the worst thing imaginable, but just the waiting that you went through is horrific.
I mean, we had a 50-50. You know, that's what our odds were, because I called the hospitals. I got with whoever who was in charge that all the schools, that the school was evacuated, and that it was possible that one of her teachers were alive and was seen helping kids get out of the school. So we had that, thinking that she's out there somewhere hiding, and that's what we were going through, thinking it was just that she was out there.
And I know you were at the Civic Center where they told you to go, and then you went back to the school and then had to go back there. And then how long was it until you actually learned what happened?
All of this, I found out that this was around 12 o'clock, and I had a buddy of mine helping us find her, and I think we found out a little bit before midnight. So, I mean, almost 12 hours till they told us that she was deceased.
Your daughter's funeral is this Sunday. It's how are you getting through each hour, each minute?
Just remembering all the good things, all the things that she had told us. We're going through pictures and videos, and we have our ups and we have our downs, and I believe that Alithia would want us to be strong, and that she's in a better place, and she's safe.
Well, she's such a beautiful little girl, and Ryan, I'm so sorry.
I see her drawing.
Yeah. Well, I love the idea that a drawing of hers will be in the White House. Ryan, thank you so much for sharing a little of Alithia with us. I wish you continued strength and peace in the days ahead. Ryan Ramirez, thank you. We'll have more from Uvalde as well as from the war in Ukraine. We'll be right back.
This is CNN. More people get their news from CNN than any other news source.
When you travel the world, make sure the world travels with you. Check in, log on, and get connected with all of the latest developments at your fingertips. CNN Partner Hotels. Connected to your world.
I'm Max Foster in London, and this is CNN.
Number of developments tonight in Ukraine to tell you about, starting with a new editorial by President Biden published just moments ago in the New York Times. He states the U.S. is providing Ukraine, quote, more advanced rocket systems and munitions. We'll have more on that in just a moment. Also today, an oil embargo of Russia by the European Union, part of a larger package of sanctions that takes aim at about 2/3 of Russian oil imports and 90% by year's end. On the battlefield, Ukrainians now say that Russia controls most of Severodonetsk, which is a key city in the eastern Donbass region. You can see it there on the map. It's a big gain for Russia. Today, both sides blaming the other after the explosion of what the Ukrainians said was a tank of nitric acid at a chemical plant in that city. Separately, officials say that all critical infrastructure in the city has been destroyed and more than 90% of homes are damaged. Today, President Zelensky said the Ukrainian military has made progress in the north in Kharkiv and in the south in Kherson. Our Matthew Chance joins us now from Kyiv with more. So talk more about the gains that Russian forces have made in Donetsk and the Luhansk regions in the east.
Yeah, Anderson, they've made some significant gains in that city of Severodonetsk, which is the last big remaining city to be captured by the Russians in the Luhansk region. The Luhansk region important because it's half of Donbass. The Russians say they want the whole of Donbass as a military priority. So once they establish full control over Severodonetsk, it'll be a big political win for Moscow because it can say, look, we've achieved 50% of that aim. But the fight has been, very dirty, sort of literally. We've seen these images of a massive plume of orange smoke billowing over the battlefield after a chemical plant came under attack. Both sides, as you mentioned, blaming one another. It's also been a scene of fierce fighting as well, with the Ukrainians making sure that the Russians pay as high a price as possible militarily to gain control over that city. So a very nasty struggle for that town indeed. There's been fighting elsewhere in the region as well, but particularly the counter-offensive that's been taking place to the south of the country, as Russia has been focusing much of its resources to achieve that political and military win in Severodonetsk. The Ukrainians have been taking advantage of possible vulnerabilities to the south and trying to reclaim territory with some success in that area, striking against territory that had already been conquered by the Russians and bringing it back under Ukrainian government control. So in the east, there is progress by the Russians, but there's also an ebb and flow on the battlefield, and the Ukrainians are also making some gains.
It's interesting to see this video from the Ukraine's defense intelligence of, I assume that's a Ukrainian helicopter being used by Ukraine. We haven't seen that very often. This past weekend, President Biden said he would not send rockets with the range to give Ukraine the ability to strike targets inside Russia. We now have learned he plans to send more, quote, more advanced rocket systems and munitions. Do we know what kind of weapons the Ukrainian leaders say they need now on the front lines?
Yeah, I mean, look, they want more weapons is the kind they need, but particularly they need weapons with a longer range because they're coming under increasing attack from long-range weapons from the Russian side, and they've got nothing to answer that with. They're just having to sit there and take the punishment. And it means that the Russians are being able to make these battlefield gains. To turn that tide and to reverse those gains, they're going to need long-range weapons. And they've been asking the Americans and other allies for this for some time. And there are going to be weapons given to Ukraine, of course, as part of the $40 billion worth of aid, including $20 billion of military aid that the Biden administration has already agreed. But it's not the longest range weapons they could have provided. Some of these MLRS, multiple launch rocket systems that the Ukrainians have been asking for, they can reach 300 miles in terms of range. The Biden administration is giving weapon systems with a much shorter range of that, somewhere in the region of 50 miles or so is the figure I've heard. But it still sort of more than doubles the capability in terms of range that the Ukrainians would have at their fingertips. So it'd be a big help for them.
Matthew Chance, appreciate it from Kyiv tonight. Thanks. Perspective now from retired General Wesley Clark, CNN military analyst and former NATO Supreme Allied Commander. General Clark, you heard Matthew's report. Do you believe the momentum of the war in the East has shifted in favor of Russia?
Yes, it is shifting. It hasn't fully shifted, but it is shifting because what we never hear about, Anderson, these brave Ukrainians that have held it so long, they're taking losses and holding it. So they're getting pounded. And the Russians are an artillery-heavy army. They've always been that. They outnumber the Ukrainian artillery 2 to 3 to 1. They mass it. It's really hard for the Ukrainians to stand up to that without taking casualties. They have taken casualties. So, yeah, I mean, the momentum is shifting. Now, can it be held? Can we hold in Donbass? Or are we going to get blown out of there? That remains to be seen. The president's remarks and his op-ed are really, really important, very significant at this moment, and very, very warmly, going to be very warmly welcomed, I'm sure, by Ukraine. What he says is we're going to provide longer range systems. And when you don't have the massive artillery, you've got to be able to have longer range and better warheads to be able to outgun the enemy and keep that artillery off your own troops. So these MLRS, when they get there, will make a big difference, I think.
And I should know this, but their range is far greater than the howitzers that the U.S. has been providing.
That's right, probably double. It depends on the exact addition of the rocket that's sent there, but 70, 80, 90 kilometers is possible. So that's the 50 mile that Matthew was talking about. And the howitzers are shooting at best 24 miles.
You know, it's interesting. I mean, now the war is harder for people around the world to see. It's harder for reporters to get to the front lines. It's not like when they're bombing Kyiv and people can see the horror on their television screens or, wherever they watch these images come across. And so people stop paying attention. And then world leaders also, NATO, President Biden has cobbled together NATO and had, they're more united than they've probably been in a long, long time. How long can that unity stay, though, as the wars, leaves the front pages in some cases, and as it becomes more complicated, as Russia, may make a play to just hold on to the land that they've been able to take and say they won't go any farther? Seems like there's going to be more divisions and more calls for some sort of a settlement.
Yeah, there is. It's starting already. But, these European leaders always play to their domestic politics. And that's what Germany and France are doing today. As long as they've got Poland between them and Russia or Belarus, they feel relatively secure. If you're in Poland, you don't feel very secure, or in the Baltic states right now, because you could be the next victim of this. So the United States has to bridge this gap. It requires U.S. leadership, exactly the kind of leadership President Biden showed in that op-ed that just came out in the New York Times. And it means the U.S. will take the lead in supplying the weapons. It means the U.S. will take the lead in supporting the sanctions. It means these European leaders can then lean on the United States and say, well, we didn't really want to do this, but the Americans, it's these tough Americans, they always want to use weapons and stuff, and they get political support when they say that. It's the old game that's been played in NATO for 70 years, Anderson. And it's just a question of whether this administration can continue to hold it together. I hope we can.
General Clark, appreciate your time. Thank you. Coming up, a verdict this afternoon in the highly charged trial linked to the Trump-Russia probe. This one centering on the Clinton campaign lawyer accused of lying to the FBI. What the jury decided next.
I'm Paulo Sandoval in Bogota, Colombia, and this is CNN.
Africa Avant-Garde, Saturday on CNN in association with Access Bank.
Mainland China tolerates no signs of dissent whatsoever.
Are you anticipating dozens of people being prosecuted? Hundreds? Thousands?
Stories of mass internment camps have been trickling out.
Do you think you'll see your husband again?
This period of mourning is taking place in a real climate of fear. The humanitarian crisis that is unfolding in front of our eyes here.
This is one of the cells? Come on in here.
We're flying over ISIS front lines. This is the only protection we have. The nerves are still very much on edge. Firefighters have been battling this blaze for weeks.
What do you say to people who question climate change?
We need to do something now.
Ivan Watson, CNN.
In Washington today, a federal jury found Hillary Clinton's former presidential campaign attorney not guilty of lying to the FBI. Michael Sussman was acquitted of accusations he wasn't honest when he gave the Bureau's general counsel a tip during the 2016 campaign about possible connections between then-candidate Donald Trump and Russia. This was the first case brought to trial so far by that special prosecutor John Durham since he was appointed to look into the origins of the Russia probe by then Attorney General William Barr 3 years ago. CNN's Evan Perez joins us now with more. So what more is Sussman accused of doing?
Well, Anderson, he was accused of essentially lying to the FBI during the September 2016 meeting. Prosecutors made the case that this was really a plot by the Hillary Clinton campaign to try to get an investigation of these supposedly suspicious computer links between the Trump organization and a bank in Russia. The problem for them was that they were relying on witnesses who repeatedly had very poor memories of exactly what happened. And from what you saw in the jury reaching this verdict after about six and a half hours or so, they clearly did not believe that he lied or that the lie was material. So that was a big problem for the prosecution.
So is the not guilty verdict, does that affect the future of the Durham investigation?
Well, it does. It raises some important questions, not only for Durham and the Attorney General, the Justice Department who oversees Durham. We have one more trial in October, Anderson. There's a Russian analyst who helped do some of the research allegedly that went into the Steele dossier. That's coming up in October. But there are some important questions that are being raised for the Justice Department. This case was a flimsy case. This case was really very thin. And so the question for Merrick Garland and Lisa Monaco, the two leaders of the Justice Department, is how much longer are you going to let John Durham continue doing this investigation? 3 years, it's already gone on. That's much longer than Robert Mueller's investigation of the Trump-Russia investigation.
There's clearly political considerations in that, obviously, or the appearance of. What's been the reaction to the verdict on the right?
Well, you can see on the right, they already feel that Durham has given them what they needed. The former president, of course, he wanted people in the so-called deep state. He wanted his political enemies prosecuted before the 2020 election. That didn't happen, obviously, and it hasn't happened at all yet. So today, though, you saw on the right that they were celebrating that they believed what this case did was expose this supposed conspiracy by the Clinton campaign to smear Donald Trump. For them, again, this trial served to bring that to the front. The judge kept warning people, by the way, the lawyers on this case, that this was not to relitigate the 2016 campaign. That's really what it ended up doing.
I'm impressed. Appreciate it. Thanks. Coming up, President Biden, inflation in the midterms, how the White House is trying to roll out a months-long pitch to voters to try to win back their trust in the economy. We'll have a live report from the White House next.
I'm Blake Essig in Tokyo, and this is CNN.
Across Africa, businesses are working together like never before. All news on CNN, Connecting Africa.
Join me, Eleni Jokas, as we crisscross the continent to show you how new connections are revolutionizing commerce in Africa. This month, Connecting Africa through technology.
The fintech space in Nigeria and across Africa is really growing very well.
Connecting Africa on CNN, in association with Afreximbank.
The Blancpain 50 Fathoms really established the design vocabulary of modern dive watches. It has a history and an authenticity that's very hard to match.
It dates back to the mid-1950s when French frogmen were dissatisfied with the options and they wanted something particular.
It was designed in collaboration with a guy named Captain Robert Maloubier, who was a French combat diver.
They briefed in this watch to have very specific attributes. They wanted a black dial, they wanted oversized numerals, and they wanted an external rotating bezel that could be lined up with a large minute hand to indicate to them exactly how many minutes of oxygen time they had left. And they wanted this watch to do all of that while glowing underwater at 90 meters. So it was a tough brief. Enter the 50 Fathoms. It did the job for the frogmen, and it does the job for the modern man.
Connect the world with Becky Anderson.
It all starts here. Changing, fighting, creating, connecting. That's why we're here. We live here, we work here, we're from here, and we'll go wherever the story takes us.
I'm Becky Anderson in Tehran.
We are in Jerusalem. Real news that shapes our world. Exploring not just what's going on, but why.
I just want to press you on one further point.
Getting perspective on this region from this region. Places that many of us know, but few of us get to see. Observing countries on the move, still rooted in tradition. It all starts here, and that's why we're here, bringing you the world from our Middle Eastern hub.
Connect the world with Becky Anderson, today on CNN.
This week, President Biden and his team are rolling out a months-long campaign to try to win back voters on the issues of inflation and the economy ahead of the fall's midterm elections. Our chief White House correspondent, Kaitlan Collins, joins us now. So the president has pledged to, in his words, respect the Fed's independence in addressing inflation, but he also met with Fed Chair Jerome Powell and the Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen today. What was that about?
Well, the White House said it was to congratulate Powell on another term as the chairman of the Federal Reserve, but Anderson, it was clearly designed also